My subject today is hypoglycemia, and it's an extremely difficult one because, first of all, I'm speaking to a lay audience in one sense, and I'm speaking to a very experienced audience in another sense. Hypoglycemia isn't even a disease. It is a symptom. It's a symptom that produces some signs as well. And so, first of all, I'm going to describe the various symptoms and even signs of hypoglycemia so that you can decide whether you fit into this pattern or not. But it is a good opportunity to exercise your powers of discrimination of the real from the unreal, because as is well known, medical students in training end up with the opinion eventually that they have every disease in the book as they have them gradually unfolded to them. So because you think, good heavens, that's me, it doesn't necessarily mean to say that you are a hypoglycemic. And in the end, various sugar tests are the things that will decide that. It is a disease of discipleship, but that doesn't mean to say that disciples, those who are not disciples, don't get it. It's extremely prevalent amongst disciples because it is one very frequently, most frequently, concerned with sensitivity. And when we tread the path, we're always trying to make ourselves more sensitive to higher vibrations, and indeed, hypoglycemia is, for us anyway, a great enigma. And there are many things that I'm going to discuss today which are in the form of questions, and we can't really give the answers to them as yet. The condition is really very young. By that I mean that it is only in recent times that it has been regarded as a condition at all. Let's consider some of the symptoms of the condition. It comes on usually during the day, or it may come on in the early hours of the morning. And both of these facts would tend to point to certain kinds of hypoglycemia when it comes on. The main symptom is excessive and sudden fatigue. Excessive and sudden fatigue. We call it that sinking feeling. That sinking feeling. And an old aunt of mine used to say, "Oh dear, I can't go on, I must go and have something to eat." And out of that alone, that idea that all you have to do is to eat some glucose and you're all right again, has grown a lot of other misconceptions. Because for many hypoglycemics, the answer is not just to suck some sugar. It is for some people where the sugar has lowered itself very, very slowly and progressively as it has been used up in the blood and hasn't been replaced. You see, all the cells of the body feed on sugar. They have to have glucose. And this glucose, elaborated or broken down from the carbohydrates that we eat, enters the blood, and a certain level is reached. And the body has many mechanisms for keeping the blood sugar at a certain level. Well, with some people, the supply of sugar is insufficient. Maybe it's because they're old, maybe it's because they have an insufficiency in some organ or the other. So the fact that my old aunt used to get the sinking feeling was probably the result of being aged and the fact that she hadn't eaten for 4 or 5 hours and that the available sugar in the blood was beginning to drop. But then, of course, that sinking feeling can come on just after a very heavy carbohydrate meal. And that is a very different sort of hypoglycemia. It's the result not of having not eaten for a long time, but it's the result, rather, of having made yourself sensitive in some way by eating a sweet meal. So I wanted to just differentiate between the two right to begin with. Excessive fatigue, that sinking feeling. And with it there comes irritability, shortness with a family. Can't be bothered with anybody or anything. And a sort of restlessness, a restlessness. It isn't exactly possible to say where the restlessness is coming from. If you've had a blow on the head, then that can almost exactly lead to a restlessness that can be diagnostic. But here the restlessness seems to arise from the whole body. It is, in fact, one as a result of low blood sugar. What the body is trying to tell you to do is, for heaven's sake, get up and run around and get your adrenals going to make the liver secrete us some more sugar. We're running short of food here, all we cells. I'm trying to put it in as simple language as possible. And so the restlessness seems to be something in which you want to alter the status quo in the body, arising from that. And with it there comes, and I must remind you, this is a talk for esotericists, not for doctors or for medical students. There comes this, with the restlessness, a feeling of wanting to reject the world. And this is what is of such great interest to the disciple, because that little added stimulus of rejection is what many disciples just need in order to undertake some esoteric experimentation or development. As you well know, from what I have told you in my techniques of astral projection and in my book Meditation, when we turn inwards, the matter of rejecting the world is of great help. It is something that we have to cultivate and develop as an act of thinking. There's nothing out there that I want. At this time, I want to turn inwards and meet my higher self more than anything in the world. We say it to ourselves, we practice it as a preliminary in meditation, as an act, as part of the seating of oneself. Well, that is emphasized very nicely for you if you're a hypoglycemic. Whatever ability you have to do that is accentuated by the symptoms of hypoglycemia. And you really don't want to have anything to do with that world out there. There can come with it, not always, there can come with it confusion, especially if it is an irregular feature. But if it is a person who has hypoglycemic spells quite frequently during the day, as I do, I cope with the confusion. I don't like to give a lecture just when I'm feeling hypoglycemic, and so I take precautions for it. Confusion, nervousness, slight agitation, and it's not reported, but it's as if you're feeling that there is a tremulousness about you and butterflies here in the solar plexus chakra region. This is where the main feeling is felt, right here, the solar plexus chakra, 2 inches above the umbilicus, above the navel. And this is because the condition is metabolic, and the metabolic region of the body is the liver, and the liver is a solar plexus chakra organ. It is an organ which is directly vitalized by the solar plexus chakra. Here are some of the organs vitalized by it. The liver, with, of course, the gallbladder, and the duodenum. Let's put the stomach in next. There we are. The stomach and the duodenum. Lying in the loop of the duodenum is the pancreas, which is the endocrine gland that is the underlying physical structure of the solar plexus chakra. All chakras are linked to endocrine glands. All chakras are linked to endocrine glands, and the pancreas organ is the endocrine gland for the solar plexus chakra. So here it is. So here are some of the structures related to the solar plexus chakra. There it is, I'm putting it in. And the nadis from this rotating wheel feed the prana to all the structures that you are seeing here. All the structures that you are seeing here. There they are. So it's small wonder that this is a region in which you feel the main focal point of the hypoglycemic symptoms. There are other manifestations of nervousness like a jumpiness, oversensitivity to sound and light, photophobia if you like to call it that, eye twitches, sometimes the tremulousness of the eyelids, but then of course that is frequently associated with lack of sleep and nervous exhaustion. A temporary or transient depression. If you're already depressed, it'll make the depression worse. But a transient depression, a depression that goes when you have laid down and when certain mechanisms come into action and raise the blood sugar. It has a tendency to lower the blood pressure, Whether that may, in fact, overcome a naturally high blood pressure has yet to be seen, but the blood pressure can be lowered. I always describe it as a condition in which you just feel you cannot take up arms against the sea of troubles. You just cannot take up arms against the sea of troubles, as Shakespeare would have said. Fainting spells can occur. Fainting spells can occur for some people. And it is so like what we call vasovagal syncope. By that we mean a condition in which the vagus is stimulated and there is a sudden lowering of blood pressure, blood drains out of the head into the limbs and so on, that this can be regarded as similar to that, fainting spell. Sort of postural difficulties. It's easier when you're like this to lie down. When you're standing up, you feel tottery, you feel a little dizzy, and so the first natural instinct is for you to lie down and to seek out some dark, quiet corner and curl up in that corner and hide away from the world. And in this condition, generally, there are set in motion certain stimuli which cause the liver to secrete some more sugar to break down glycogen and secrete it as glucose into the blood, and after a short spell, a recess, you can get up again and feel quite, may I say, even refreshed from it. I'll be coming to that matter a little later on. Some suffer from insomnia as a result of it, and in England, in the old days, we used to have beverages, night beverages like Horlicks, because they used to talk about night starvation. And I'm pretty sure that this was not meant deliberately to fool the public, but many people felt night starvation. And it was because round about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, after they had been without food for some time, they would awaken with an insomnia and a hunger and all these feelings that I have described here. Well, I sometimes get it in the early hours of the morning, and I therefore adjust my life in such a way that I get up anyway at 3 o'clock every morning. If you look down from an aeroplane in the area that I'm in, you'd see one bedroom light on every night. And that would be at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I will get up and go downstairs and make myself a cup of tea. Now, first of all, let me say that there is a lot of controversy about the hypoglycemia itself, how to treat it, what to do about it. Is it serious? Isn't it serious? Is it a disease or isn't it? Shall I worry about it? Shall I not worry about it? And the best thing at this stage, in view of all the chaos, is to alter your diet slightly alter your diet, and adjust to the damn thing, adjust to it. And I'm going to show you that if you have it and can't overcome it, then it can be used to your advantage. It can be used to your advantage. Quite frequently, it differs immensely, of course, from person to person, but quite frequently there are gastrointestinal disorders giving you diarrhea, and a very frequent sign of it is low abdominal pain. Always, when the abdomen is pressed towards the bottom of that region below the navel, there is tenderness there and sometimes actual abdominal pain, irrespective of whether there's diarrhea. This is said to be the result of an increase of peristalsis, the wave of contraction, the excitability of the intestine. We all have peristalsis, in which the long 22-foot intestine progressively contracts and waves to move the waste material towards the rectum. But in hypoglycemia, the pulses can be accelerated and emphasized, and this is the result of almost certainly of vagal stimulation. This is what you have to bear in mind all the time, that for disciples, usually this is a vagus condition. And if you have read my reports on the vagus nerve in my various books, you will know that the vagus nerve is the psychic areal of the body. It is the most sacred tissue in the sense that it brings down into physical tissues what we call solar fire. And if the disciple is meditating or making himself sensitive in various ways, and solar fire pours down into the etheric body, lighting up the chakras, stimulating them, and so on, then in physical tissue, the solar fire is taken by the vagus nerves to 50 or 60 structures throughout the body, right down into the intestines. And so the solar fire flows through the vagus nerve right into the tissues and cells of the body. And obviously what you're going to say now, well, what effect does that have on me psychically? And the answer is it can have a profound effect. That doesn't mean to say that the moment that you're hypoglycemic, that you have extrasensory perception. Not at all. It means that you have the potential to take what exists and to discriminate the real from the real and develop that potential to a condition in which it can be of practical use to you. That's all it means. And it takes years, even if you have the advice of somebody who has developed potential out of it, it still takes years. First of all, you must understand that whilst you are having these hypoglycemic attacks, you are concerned with them. And the last thing in the world you want to do is to think at that stage of assaulting the kingdom of heaven. If you are feeling so uneasy, it's not the sort of time that you would normally want to undertake spiritual disciplines and exercises. And so it takes some years to adjust yourself to these spells, and all the time you're trying to eliminate them anyway with diet. And, well, would you expect there to be any really easy way into the kingdom of heaven? No. But it does give a person who can use it some sort of advantage. During the spells, no good, you can't concentrate. You might as well abandon it, and even if you have to creep off for 5 or 10 minutes, do that. If you're caught in an office, of course. If you're caught in an office, I'm assuming that you have reported to your doctors, and that's the first thing that you should do, report to the doctor and get all the usual tests done. But if it persists despite your treatment, orthodox medical treatment, then you have to adjust to it. And if you're in an office, you have to get up and walk around, and the ideal thing is to get emotionally fired up. And with the secretion of adrenaline through emotional arousal, this brings sugar back into circulation. So there are problems here. And if you are tied up in an office and just can't lie down for 5 or 10 minutes, it makes it awfully difficult, not only for you, but for your office colleagues, who have to bear the brunt of it and wonder what the hell they've done to upset you. So that's what I meant when I say you have to adjust. Inability to concentrate. Some people get allergies, and there's a general lassitude, but a feature that can be very embarrassing is to produce ketones. I'm not going to describe ketones here, but let me just say that because you are so short of sugar in the blood sugar is so low, the body tries to burn fat. The body begins to burn fats. And here again, metabolic difficulties arise, and the breath begins to smell. Now, it isn't a foul breath. Perhaps we better just divert for a moment. We give all this in our diploma of esoteric healing, but let's just consider for a moment some of the three major causes of bad breath. And they are generally these. First of all, there can be bad breath as a result of cavities in the teeth. Where food isolates itself, decays, and the bad breath can be as a result of that. There can also be bad breath as a result of poor ventilation of the lungs. None of us fill our lungs in the normal course of events. The lungs can hold as much as 11 pints of air. We normally draw in only about half a pint, as you're sitting here now. Now, if that goes on right through the night, or in fact we're bad ventilators generally, then it can mean that with sudden use of the lungs, especially if we're going to suddenly start talking to somebody and need the air in order to resonate, to move the larynx, then you can get foul air from the unextended parts of the lungs, from the dead areas, dead space of the lungs, coming out then and producing the foul breath. Now, the one that usually produces the worst breath, and which is peculiarly applicable to the esotericist, is the breath that comes through fasting. And for heaven's sake, do remember that when you fast, you have an obligation to the public, especially if you're a public figure, not to advertise the fact by creating a halitosis that is probably the worst that can be produced. Esoteric people tend to do this, tend to produce a halitosis because they fast frequently. And then what is happening is that the air, the free space above the last food that was eaten, comes out of the mouth. And the food has already become fecal. It has partly digested, it is in a process of being eliminated and moved on and so on, and the smell of it can be really vile. And whilst I'm a great protagonist of self-disciplines, and I admire Dr. Goodman's discourses on fasting, so why I mention that is that the hegemony of the mind, the hold that the mind has over the individual, is temporarily reduced. And that, to the esotericist, represents an advantage. I am not suggesting that it is a good thing if you have hypoglycemic tendencies to make yourself more so that you can achieve some spiritual advancement. Please don't understand that from what I'm saying. What I am saying is that it is very rare for the medical world to be able to treat the condition with drugs. It's not a drug condition, and therefore it's not a popular condition. The drugs can't help it, and so it is very rare for the condition to be controlled. You have to live with it. And if you have to live with it, you might as well get some of the perks out of it, some of the advantages from it. Sensory attachment is broken. Sensory attachment is broken. Sometimes you can have rank, outright etheric perception. A brain short of oxygen is a brain that has very frequently got etheric vision. And the impact, I hear people describe this so frequently when they're telling me about their spiritual experiences that I don't even remark on it anymore, because obviously you don't want to upset a person. You don't want to upset a person if he has transient hypoglycemia. What you might do is suggest that he have a general check over. But the etheric vision, which you will notice, which will have escaped your notice, is a condition in which there is sudden spots of light. You suddenly, just for a brief flash, a few warning flashes in fact, everything around you is tinged with light. If you're looking at your hands or your fingers, then there are gushes of light streaming out of them, and even the intervening space between them is filled with these little bright gold dots of light. It's not exactly the same sort of light that you get when people would say that you are liverish, and you see great big vitality globules floating across your... It's not that one at all. It's a very sudden and very brief etheric vision in which everything is tinged with these tiny little sparks of light. They're not vitality globules. The next esoteric symptom is an increase of vrittis, an increase of vrittis. These are the visual images which are completely uncontrolled that slowly pass through your vision when you withdraw from the world. Sometimes people get them if they sleep in the afternoon. Sometimes people get them as the result of persisting with their meditation. And the sight of vrittis, in any case, is a signpost that you are making steady advances towards achieving a state of withdrawal in the world for your meditation, and even as a preliminary to out-of-body experience. So, vrittis. I have lived for 25 years with vrittis and have many, many diaries filled with impressions of them, and yet they're always hard to describe. They're there before you know they're there, and they're gone before you can register them. And you only know that they were there when they were gone, when they've gone. Does that help at all? It should help you to identify them. They're not there when you look for them, because the mind has to go out of function before they will come there. And so they're there, and they're slipped out of recognition or of confrontation with you before you can say, that was what it was. Now, the true clairvoyance comes from the ability to perceive right into these vrittis and to remember exactly what was seen in them. And the ability to extend them, When that can be done, and it takes years of experience, then you are on to natural clairvoyance. Why I say natural is that you are doing it, you are producing it. But the master, your spiritual mentor, can flood your consciousness at this time with images which are identical to vrittis. And so if you posit in your spiritual diary that you have a question, say you don't understand what Mars square to Venus means in your horoscope, and you've got the horoscope there. What does this mean in my horoscope for me? And pray God you are asking it not from a personality point of view, but from the point of view of your spiritual unfoldment. Then you can examine the flashes of vrittis that come to you. 95% of them will be meaningless to begin with. But eventually you will develop a condition in which some are extremely vivid, and they will not give you answers in terms of, well, this means that you should spend more time with your meditation, but it will give that answer in terms of symbols. And there is no way in which a person out of his own volition and out of his own capacities can approach communication with a higher kingdom in full consciousness without having to learn a set of his own symbols. Symbols which will apply in his vrittis, symbols which will apply in his dreams, symbols which will apply in his meditation. There is no way beyond that. And I have allocated the best part of my time here at the festival in 20 talks to this matter of the language of symbols, because try as you may in any technique, and there are many techniques, and some of them are more recommendable to you than others, try as you may, in the end you are faced with this inevitable factor that you cannot communicate as a spiritually growing entity with the higher realms from which truth, beauty, and goodness flows without being conversant with a set of symbols, a working set of symbols. Now, I have given one talk on this, in which I took for an example Libra, the parachute, the canopy, and so on. I'm going to give another one tonight. And again, I will introduce symbols. Now, fortunately, the beauty is that these symbols are universal for our subrace. They're universal for our subrace, and if you have any, and please don't present them to me here, send them to me in England. If you have any, and they can be connected in the way that I will present this tonight, and as I have presented it, I would like to have them. I would really like to have them, and I will have them sorted out. But do understand that, and if you don't go along with us, you might just as well save yourself the time of sitting in at my talks and go to some other speaker and hear of possibly a different way. But don't think that I offer in any way a sidetrack or a way around having to discipline the mind and having to quiet the mind and to examine the experiences that occur after the mind is quiet. And out of those experiences to draw a language of symbols that you can communicate yourself consciously with the God. In fact, hypoglycemia conveys, though it is usually not recognized, conscious mediumship. Conscious mediumship. Physical implications of this. It can be dangerous. It can be dangerous. If you feel hypoglycemic, you should certainly stop the car and lie yourself flat. This will immediately enable certain processes to be set in motion which will restore sugar supplies to the head. And therefore, I have to say that there is a possibility of accident proneness. Accident proneness is the result of hypoglycemia. The family surroundings are disturbed, people find you edgy, and if they don't understand you, then it can lead to upsets. Therefore, you should, when you are not hypoglycemic and you're in a very good mood, take your family aside and just explain to them that there are going to be times when you're going to be edgy and that this is part of your physiological condition, and you would be grateful if they would just be a little more tolerant during that time. If anybody wants to observe what lying down and composing the mind can do, someday perhaps I will demonstrate in myself that the head, the face, the blood vessels into the brain in meditation become flushed. An excessive amount of blood is passed into the head region during meditation. And therefore, although we can't say meditation is a prescription for hypoglycemia, it is possible through the years, by withdrawing, lying flat, observing certain mind-controlled disciplines, to increase the flow of blood to the head region. And this overcomes the hypoglycemia pretty quickly. One of the effects of all this is to make you generally inefficient for spells on whatever job you're doing. But it always has its boon, and sometimes I get a bit hypoglycemic when I'm lecturing. The right side of the brain begins to function more than the left, and I get a hell of a lot of stuff through while I'm lecturing. And it's an ill wind that blows nobody any good. And some of the most, the greatest revelations I've ever had was while lecturing and running short of sugar, and having to stick it out. And in those conditions, it's very hard to maintain your intellectual approach, and you become more intuitive, much more intuitive. But you do dither a little bit as one hemisphere of the brain fights with the other for dominance. And people like this very frequently turn their heads. I've seen Sol Lewis do it many times. Turn the head very slightly, unconsciously, to the right, and the right cerebrum begins to take over, and this can be stimulated in hypoglycemia. Causes of the condition for the disciple: stress. And in discipleship, as we well know, we court stress. We court it. Even if we're not on the path of discipleship, there is stress enough in the world. But we court the stress. By that I mean that not only do we have to live our lives, but we have to do something in addition to merely maintaining our personalities in the world. We go out of our way, we stick our necks out for duties, for tasks, for responsibilities, which bring us increasing stress. For me, I would take myself as a typical disciple, the stress is aggravated when it is on more than one level. Give me physical stress on its own and I can cope with it. Give me emotional stress on its own and I can cope with it. But when you get physical and emotional and mental stress coming all at once, it is then that the disciple really begins to feel the crunch. And the effect of the stress is to act on the pituitary gland. Now notice again and again the glands that come up are endocrine glands. We've already talked about the pancreas related to the solar plexus chakra. Stress hits the pituitary gland, which lies at the base of the hypothalamus in near the midbrain. And the pituitary gland is the gland, the endocrine gland, related to ajna, the brow chakra, whose focal point is in the square inch between the eyebrows. And so stress acts on the pituitary gland. Stress acts on the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland secretes a hormone called ACTH, and it's the adrenal stimulating hormone. Again, we're onto another endocrine gland, and therefore another chakra is involved. And the adrenal gland sits like a French cocked hat on the top of the kidneys. There it is. The adrenal gland is related to the kidneys, and it is stimulated by secretions of the pituitary. The adrenal gland stimulates, or when aroused, is related to the chakra at the base of the spine, the four-petaled lotus. The chakra at the base of the spine is the chakra most related to the adrenal glands. The center at the base of the spine is the one that can produce an immense amount of energy, stimulation, and through it the solar plexus chakra is stimulated. The base of the spine center stimulates the solar plexus chakra. The solar plexus chakra, in its turn, affects the pancreas that we've just been talking about. And the pancreas secretes the hormone known as insulin, and insulin is a hormone that governs the amount of sugar that will be taken through the walls of cells and consumed. So if that's a cell, and here is the sugar lying in the blood, then insulin is the hormone which will govern the amount of sugar that can be absorbed by that cell. And if we have a secretion of insulin which is excessive, an excessive amount of insulin is secreted, the cells will take up sugar rapidly from the blood. And therefore the blood sugar will drop. The blood sugar will drop. Now, there are other ways in which the same mechanism is achieved. Here we have stress. For some people, not everybody, but especially for the disciple, who is receiving stress not only at a personal level, personality level, but from the effects of within, the efforts made within his meditation efforts, his struggle to work with symbols, the extra mental fatigue of self-examination, and so on. So he is particularly sensitive. And then there's another pathway. And this is the pathway which many of you can correct very easily. Excessive sugar in the diet. And to a lesser extent, the carbohydrate, which is really sugar in a more dehydrated form. So carbohydrate, but particularly sugar, taken into the stomach, swallowed, stimulates the vagus nerve directly. Stimulates the ends of the vagus nerve directly in the stomach. The vagus nerve, stimulated, reaches the pancreas. You must get something on the vagus nerve, and I've got it in my books, and I can't tell you more than that. The stimulation of the vagus nerve acts on the pancreas, insulin is secreted excessively, and the blood sugar drops again. I'm a very healthy person, despite my hypoglycemia. I live with it, I use the situation. I even cheat occasionally. If I have an hour, 2 hours to myself, I can even sweeten my tea and produce a quick hypoglycemic condition which enables me to withdraw very, very rapidly, and I'm ready for business. I'm ready for work. Now, I'm not recommending that to you. I'm not recommending it to you at all. I've given you quite clearly instructions of how to deal with the condition. I'm going to go on to the diet aspects in a moment. I'm merely pointing out what causes the hypoglycemia, and we're going to deal with the other aspects of it in a moment. Many of the techniques of discipleship are calculated to stimulate the ajna chakra and the pituitary gland. That's why I call this the disease of discipleship. That if you are already suffering from hyperinsulinism, hyper means excessive secretions of insulin. You are overreactive and you secrete a lot of insulin, which means you have a strong pancreas, and the pancreas may be well stimulated excessively by your emotions, your solar plexus chakra. If you have this hyperinsulinism, then for you, the disciplines of discipleship are going to be a little harsher. They're going to stimulate your pituitary gland as they do for everybody, and that is going to affect the whole matter of insulin production. Now, what do we do about it? There are many ways in which we can adjust our psychology towards the condition, anticipate it, deal with it, have medical advice, do whatever they suggest, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. The physical body is the province of the medical man. What we're trying to consider here is inward ways of dealing with it. The first thing that we must do is to alter the diet. At least 2 of us, and we'll have a show of hands later on to see how many of you think that you have hypoglycemic bouts. At least 2 of us in my own ashram have hypoglycemia. And once you understand this, you can deal with it. You are in a state of starvation. That makes it difficult too. You're in a state of starvation, often 2 hours after you have eaten, 3 hours after you have eaten. And therefore, the way to approach the subject, the matter, is little meals frequently, small meals frequently. Now, we know that carbohydrate meals are really taboo because they aggravate the insulinism. And so the ideal, and this is what makes hypoglycemia so vicious and difficult for the disciple, the ideal is to have a diet of protein. And the best diet that I can recommend is the protein diet. Yes. If it's got to be meat, then it should be fish. And if it's got to be meat and you can't get fish, then it's got to be chicken. It's got to be the non-pigmented meats, if possible. If that's not possible, well, you have to consider the alternative. You have a condition and you've got to face up to it. It's a condition really that exists in the physical body, because in the end that's where the insulin is being produced. And the physical body is not the target of your spiritual aspiration in this life. We've all done that in Lemuria. the integration of the physical body, its development into a magnificent instrument under the control of the consciousness was all achieved in Lemuria. Some people spend their whole lives rushing around, trying to get the right foods, trying to get the right this and the right conditions for the physical body. Whereas the real battlefield for the fifth subrace is the mind. Control of the mind. The reduction of its hegemony at will. That's the battleground for the fifth subrace. And so, the problem of vegetarianism for the hypoglycemic is a difficult one, as it is also for the diabetic. And it's very strange that this is the chakra of the animal kingdom, the solar plexus center. And so we know very well that having to have a protein diet which will help to regulate this condition means, if we eat pigmented meats, that we are consuming material that puts us en rapport with the animal kingdom through the solar plexus chakra. I tell you these things because you should know about them. You have to do the adjusting, and the best way to adjust is to know all the facts. So, this is what I have to tell you, that the meals must be frequent, and if you have a weight problem, of course, even more reason to have your diet protein and green salads. One of the healthiest people I know, and I think some of you have met her, Barbara Cartland. I live on her estate. She is a woman in her 80s and a very brilliant and beautiful person, a strict dietitian. Her advice is always, especially to women with overweight problems, is a protein diet with green salads, and that you can literally have as much as you like of. After that, then there are special modifications. Now, unfortunately, I've come 6,000 miles and I have left my diet sheet somewhere, and I'll have another look for it and try and post it up somewhere here, or work something out for you, because obviously you don't want to live on what I've just suggested. I know I gave it in Washington, and I don't know if anybody has got. In fact, it could possibly be taken off the healing tapes if somebody would like to do that as a service to the festival, run the healing tapes through from Washington and extract the diet from it for hypoglycemia, and just give us a list of it. So we will put that out for you. Now, this is a subject always which is one of questions. I'll try and answer them quickly, but we've got another class almost immediately. So, or have we? How many minutes have we got? All right. Quickly then, questions?
I had a 3-hour glucose tolerance test, and it wasn't detected, and I had a 5-hour, and they thought maybe. Now, it's supposed to be an 8-hour. Why is it so difficult to pick up in a glucose tolerance?
Well, because the causes of the condition are so very, very different. I emphasized that right at the beginning. Some people produce hypoglycemia because they haven't eaten for a long time, or what they eat, or their sensitivity, or their discipleship. A numerous number of things can affect and so you need to take a variety if it doesn't show up.